We have Stacy Jones with us today for water bath canning basics. So a really great topic. Certainly, I think even for the holidays coming up, it seems like sometimes maybe canning becomes a little bit more popular or whatever the case may be. So I think it's great for Stacy to come on and share those basics with us if maybe you've been doing it before, but hopefully she's going to share of making sure we're doing it right and safe and healthy and what have you. Because sometimes things get passed along to us from family over decades of how we do things, and we're doing stuff that our great grandmother did, and maybe some health things or practices have evolved a little bit to become a little bit safer. So we want to make sure that we're all practicing those things. So really appreciate Stacy joining us today to keep us healthy.
Thank you, Lindsay, so much. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the next couple of minutes so that way we can have some more people coming in. And that way, when everybody gets in, I would really appreciate it since we're going to go ahead and we're going to start this. But if you would please scan this QR code and check yourself in. I like to do this just because it's part of my job, but also, it's nice to kind of have a check to see who all is attending these. So while we're waiting and getting everybody checked in, does anybody have any questions to start off with before we jump right into this? Okay, that's fine. Not everybody has questions right off the bat. I'm pretty sure once we get into this, there will be more questions that come about. In fact, tomorrow I'm actually doing a jalapeno pepper jelly workshop. And that's part of the reason why it's always nice to have refreshers, especially during the different seasons and the different produce. So that way you're canning the safest and most effective way that you can. Okay. Um, I see. That's okay. When she sends out the link, when Lindsay sends out the link again, you can scan it and, you know, you can do it then. I appreciate you letting me know that. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started because let's face it, there's a ton of things to cover, but we only have a finite amount of time. Okay. So today you are going to be learning about the basics of how water bath canning works, the importance of following instructions, the different canning methods, what to use, what not to use, safety measures, and foodborne illnesses. All of this is really important, especially with all of the components going together. So that way you have a shelf-stable product, and you can give it out as Christmas gifts if you would like. So we're going to be covering how it works first, right? So a good idea of this is so what you put into something actually comes out of it. And that is translated over many different areas of life, especially with food. You can't make bad food better by preserving it. And in fact, if you do preserve it, you're going to be actually putting in things that can be dangerous for you, and you're not going to get the recommended processing time in order to kill those microbes or the bacteria. And then, therefore, you're actually canning things that are going to spoil, or you're going to be promoting foodborne illness. And that's actually what we're trying not to do. We're trying to make it as safe as possible. So this is a very delicate balance with all of the canning procedures. At the very top of this pyramid is going to be the acidity or the pH. And then you can see there's temperature at one point and then time at the other. So as acidity rises, and if you think about the things that are acidic, they're going to be things like tomatoes, a whole bunch of veg, a whole bunch of fruits. And those are the things that require less temperature and less time. So you're going to be seeing that the pyramid is kind of going up in the acidity, and the temperature and the time are going to be really short, especially with that. Conversely, if you do not have enough acidity, you have to do another canning method, which is basically going to increase the temperature, and you have to increase that time. And these are low acid fruits and vegetables, and they're also going to be proteins as well. So with that temperature, you have to basically go into another atmospheric pressure, and then the higher the pressure ups the temperature, especially within the jar. But you also have to increase the time. So your pyramid is going to look very long, elongated, so to speak. But we're going to be focusing on water bath. So these are all the components going into the jar that are going to be high acid. Here in Oklahoma, there's only a few places that you're going to need to adjust your altitude, especially with canning practices. So therefore, a good majority of us can water bath, and then we don't have to worry about other things, right? So there's two kinds of styles. If we're focusing on water bath, some of the styles are what is known as like a hot pack, or you have to heat freshly prepared boiling food for about 2 to 5 minutes, and then you promptly put it into the jars loosely with the boiled food. It removes air from the food, shrinks the food, reduces the floating within it. It does create a stronger seal, and it does improve the shelf life. Some vegetables, I would recommend doing a hot pack as opposed to a raw pack. A raw pack is filling the jars with all of the food that you're going to, and then you're going to be putting like brine or vinegar or some other liquid in order to cover it. And then you're going to be putting your lid on the jars and whatnot. So the biggest indicator about whether or not we're going to be doing a water bath or pressure canning is going to be, is it a fruit, a vegetable, a meat? Is it high acidity? Is it low acidity? There are some guides, and hopefully we can show it right up here. So this is from the Ball Blue Book, and this kind of gives you where your temperature needs to be and what fruits and veggies. There's also a guide on the complete guide to home canning from the USDA. In fact, if you want to, you can download that resource directly from their website. For all of these various canning methods, the processing time actually depends on the jar size. Okay, use the jars made for home canning. My grandmother, bless her heart, she was like, I'm going to can some jelly, and I've got all of these commercial jelly jars I have, and I'm going to use them. And I had to politely explain to her that you're that you can't because you can't ensure the seal. And that's one of the things that you do need to look for. But on the jar size, you have to use the jars made for home canning. Use the size in the recipe. Generally, you're going to use half pint jars. You can use pint jars and quarts depending on what you're canning. Um, Never use colored jars. Not only do they cost more, but they also disguise possible spoilage, and that's something that we kind of want to avoid. And avoid different shapes as they may not meet your needs. Not only that, but if you're stacking jars upon jars, or if you're trying to get them all into a confined area, it's going to be really hard in order to stack different size types of jars. You want to prepare your jars properly. Anytime you are water bath canning or anytime you're canning, you're going to check for cracks, chips, sharp edges. You want to make sure that you're cleaning your jars well, either in a dishwasher or you're going to be washing them by hand. And then the next thing that we're going to be looking for is either your lids or your flats and the screw bands. Okay. Nowadays, the lids have a coating, and the coating is basically what ensures your seal. Now, that coating is Plastitol. It's actually a mixture of plastic and silicone, and you don't have to boil them just like your grandmother did. You can get them up to like a simmer just to ensure that they're warm because everything else is going to be warm, but you don't have to boil them. These lids actually prevent recontamination of food, and it does prevent air from drying out the food. The only job, and the screw band has one job, is to hold that lid down during the processing part. After that, you're going to want to take it off like 12 to 24 hours after you ensure that the lid has been sealed. And you're going to check to make sure that no siphoning, which means that food is coming up and out of the jar, has happened, or you're going to be cleaning off that siphoning just in case it has. The two-piece lid and screw band system is the only method USDA tested and approved. One thing that I like to tell everybody, you're going to go and you're going to pick up your Ball Blue Book, you're going to pick up your complete guide to the USDA home canning, and you are going to read through the recipe multiple times, not only to ensure that you have enough ingredients for your recipe, but also to ensure that you're maintaining the proper steps so that way you don't have to reprocess. Reprocessing is it's basically processing again. You are looking for the specific instructions. Sometimes you're like, oh, well, that jelly said 10 minutes. Well, in fact, it could be 15. So you want to ensure that you're doing it to that recipe because the USDA and the Ball Blue Book have actually tested those recipes, and they have a thermocouple so they know what temperature the inside of that jar like is coming to, and therefore they know that they're killing off any of the germs or microbes that you need to produce a safe product. You are going to be looking for those reliable sources. The USDA guidelines were actually revised in 2015, and they have revised the website effective January of this year, which is kind of nice. Like I said, you can get a PDF version of it online, absolutely free. And you are also going to be looking for the Ball Blue Book, either 2011, 15. This one is a 2023, which is kind of nice because I always like to have new recipes, and they always are coming out with new recipes. If you have any questions about any of them, of course, you can always email me and say, hey, is this a safe recipe? What do you think about it? And I've noticed here lately that what is it, Southern Living, and there's another publication that have not done the canning. So they've done like quick pickles and, store it in a refrigerator for 3 weeks, which is nice because, again, I think they don't have all the necessary resources in order to ensure that everything that they need to have for a safe product. So which canning method should you use? A good majority of them are going to be like in a water bath canner. It's going to be a large, deep kettle that has a cover, and it's going to have a rack on the bottom in order to hold the jars up and above the heated surface, right? The heat is transferred to the food by the boiling water as it surrounds the jars, right? It uses pressure. Now, this is around 5 to 6 pounds of pressure, and that's okay. And it creates that environment within the glass jar to prevent the harmful bacteria from growing on the food, which is what we want. So that boiling temperature is going to be at 212 for the specified time in approved recipes. And that is going to kill any molds, enzymes, and some bacteria. It does reduce the microbes that will cause spoilage. For high acid foods, pH below 4.6, and that's basically the cutoff, 4.6, such as fruits, pickles, and sweet spreads. Okay, and it can be used for a raw pack, and it costs between 25 to about 170. Okay, so my electric canner that I have that I absolutely love, that is around 250. And then the other one that I got here recently, which is the one that you fill with water and you put it on the stove and everything, that one was about $50, but it's a 25 or a 32 quart. So it's pretty large. So the canning method's not recommended. And there's a lot. If you go onto TikTok, if you look at Facebook, there are so many home canners that are like, hey, you should try this. It's going to save you like a ton of time. And I just would not recommend it because let's face it, those are so unsafe. The main difference is side, right? Pressure canners are big enough to hold at least 4-quart size jars. Smaller pressure cookers or saucepans are not recommended. Not enough heat is delivered during the pasteurizing and cool down period in smaller pressure cookers and saucepans. Some people are asking me, can you take an Instapot and can you can in it just like that? The short answer is no. They have gone away from that. If you want to do like an electric pressure canner, you can, but you have to ensure that's what you're getting. So pressure cookers typically do not have mechanisms to measure the amount of pressure being applied to the jars, and it's frequently inaccurate. So that's why they recommend do not can in an Instant Pot. Okay, even though it gets up to 6 pounds, don't try it. Because with no gauge and no accurate measures, there's no way for you to know very consistently if those things have been processed long enough or had enough pressure to kill those bacteria. And the bacteria that we're really worried about is botulism. Botulism is a neurotoxin and it will start paralyzing. So some manufacturers state that their pressure cookers can be used for canning, but again, I recommend please do not try that. The USDA recommends that were determined for stovetop pressure canners, and that's the way a good majority of them are going to be. And at this time, there are no recommendations to support the use of multi-cookers, right? And as you can see, the thermal process has been done on the jars. What matters is temperature, not pressure, right? If you can't get it up to enough pressure, you can't get it up to enough temperature. And in order to ensure that the safety of the final product of the temperature in the canner must stay at a minimum throughout the process time. How do you know accurately if those things are doing that? The short answer is you can't and you don't. So another thing, this is just going on even after the heat is turned off of the Instapot or the canner. At the end of the recommended processing time, the food remains at high enough temperatures, and that's what we're looking for. This retained heat while the canner has to cool is naturally 0 pounds of pressure before opening, and that is to sterilize. If anything is done to shorten the cooling period, including very small cookers of food, it could cool down more quickly and be under processed. And under processed means more time for bacteria and germs and everything to come in there and basically have a nice environment to replicate. Can you cook it on the stovetop? Yes. Smooth cooktops, and many makers say do not use for canning. I think this was for other cooktops that had been before like 1970, 1980. I used it on my electric cooktop a lot, but the potential alternatives for those are going to be buy and install a permanent set of electric coils or gas burners as a range top, right? Or you could buy a portable electrical coil or gas burner. Sometimes I like to get my electric, boiling water out of, storage and use that. The thing about that is, yes, it does have an electric coil, but you can put it outside as well. So outdoor grilling for canning, at least one pressure canner manufacturer advises not to can on an outdoor low pressure gauge gas burner. Over 12,000 BTUs, a canner can be damaged. If there's too much heat may shorten the recommended heat up time for the canning and potentially unsafe. Any wind or breeze tends to increase the amount of time needed to bring the water up to a boil to maintain it. And therefore, the pounds per square inch of pressure can easily drop. And then when it's disrupted, you have to start all over again. And that's when you reprocess. A drop in water temperature will also interfere with boiling water. And some stoves have metal baffles on the sides, so that way a canner cannot center over the flame. So here's some things that we can look at, and these are the things that I do not recommend. If I do not recommend oven canning, and it's called dry canning. So basically, you can't ensure that the temperature inside the jar is actually reaching the temperature that you need it to be, because guess what? That would just create an environment for unsafe canning. Microwave canning, I don't recommend that because it may reach 212, but it needs to have that consistent internal temperature. And let's face it, does anybody have any time to clean up possible jars exploding in your microwave, especially when you're canning? And that is always a possibility, especially with that. Personally, I do not have time to go to the ER, especially in the middle of canning season. So let's be safe with all of these. This just sounds so absurd. I don't think I would recommend it to anybody. Dishwasher canning. Literally, you would put your cans in jars into the dishwasher and do that. Again, you can't ensure that the temperature is going to get hot enough in order to provide a safe environment, especially like that. Open kettle canning, it's called inversion method, okay? This is maybe the method that your grandmother used to do long time ago. I know my grandmother did. Basically, you put all of the hot food in, you put your lid on, you put your ring on, and then you invert and you set it down on, a towel or something, right? This process is not recommended again because the amount of heat is insufficient to destroy that bacteria. Or dry canning. So this is calling for putting dried fruits and grains such as beans and nuts into a canning jars. The lids may or may not be applied to the jars before they are heated to 200 degrees in an oven. Um, why I have several concerns. I do have several concerns. And basically, you can't ensure that the bacterial spores or the mold spores or anything may have been destroyed. And it also does not remove enough oxygen from the jar, and it could trap moisture in there, even though you have dried fruits or grains, and it condenses within it and results in the spoilage. So there's so many reasons why we should not do any of these. But the main reason that I want to hit upon is because you can't guarantee that whatever is in your jar is going to be safe because you don't know the temperature of it. Speaking of safety measures, some of the safety measures that we'd like to cover is going to be headspace. Headspace is actually really important because you're making sure that the air is going out, but the lid is coming down and you do not have you have that vacuum, and that's what you're looking for, the vacuum, but the temperature brings up so you can have the vacuum. You can see that a ½ inch needs to be for fruits, tomatoes, and pickles, about 1 inch to 1.25 inches for low acid foods, or a 1/4 of an inch or less for jams, jellies, and preserves. There may be exceptions, but you also need to read your recipe. After you get everything in there and you process, one of the important factors that we need to take into consideration is like cooling, right? You're going to allow the canner to cool naturally. You're not going to force it by running cold water on it or force it by placing it underneath like air vents or anything. And once the canner has reached that, you're going to do that. But you turn the heat off, especially with water bath canners, and then you remove the lid. You wait 5 minutes, and then you remove the jars. And I guarantee you, as soon as you take out those jars and you put it onto your towel, a good majority of them will have that pop or that thump that you're looking for in order to hear that all of the air has gone out and your lid is sealed. So the spacing of the jars allows for proper airflow. So it's about 1 inch apart. I like to do about 2 inches just because I like to have enough airflow between them. So if you have enough airflow between them, it does prevent that sour flavor. And it's actually a microbe that's within it that are still active during this time. As the jars cool, a vacuum is formed, sealing the food in the jars and preventing any new microorganisms from entering and spoiling the food. And that's what we're looking for. Killing the old, putting the air out, and preventing any new from coming in. So speaking of that ting or thump, we're talking about the sealing of the flats, the jars. So after you process, you wait for the 5 minutes, and then you check your jars out. You're going to wait for another 12 to 24 hours after leaving your jars untouched. Okay, do not touch them, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You're going to come back and you're going to see if they have sealed. So if you hear a popping sound when you're trying to test your lids, it did not seal. That's okay. You can reprocess, right? Nothing wrong with that. You can refrigerate it and you can use it within a few days, right? Or you could freeze it. Some of the headspace may need to be adjusted, like taking some of it out because a good majority of them are going to require like a ½ inch headspace. And then you wipe around the rim after filling the jars, and that helps prevent a no seal, because a good majority of the time it's either under processed or there was stuff around the rim in order to prevent that seal. a helpful hint. Sometimes if you get the right lids, such as Ball, I have noticed it has a convex, like little dome on top of it, especially in the middle. And if it's not sealed, that dome will still be present. But if it is sealed, it will be convex and it will kind of dip in just a little bit. So that's another good visual cue in order for you to know that your lid has sealed. So after it's been sealed, after it is safe, you are going to want to put it away, right? Because now it is shelf stable. So you are going to label your jars. You are going to label what is in it or the recipe that you used. And you are also going to um, label with the date. This is basically so you know, hey, that is lemon blueberry jam. I did it in June. I've got like 6 months left on it, right? Because after about a year, just like anything else, you can preserve it to a certain point, but that doesn't mean that it's not an organic matter and it won't decompose. Um, so location is actually really important. You want to make sure that you have a cool location, right? That's why a good majority of our grandparents had it in a root cellar, right? Because it was cool almost all year round, right? Do not let jars freeze. Freezing changes the food texture and it leads to rust, bursting, and broken seals that may put in bacteria. We're also going to look for a dark place and a dry place, right? And these are things to help minimize what is already going on with the food, right? We are also going to want to avoid places where the temperatures change, like uninsulated attics and basements, near furnaces and pipes, things that have dramatic changes in temperature all of the time. These are just some other safety tips that I like to put in. Um, Make sure you're washing all of your utensils and everything that you're using. Also, the biggest utensil that you're going to want to wash is actually your hands. We are trying to ensure that this is the safest food product. And just like with anything else, you need to wash your hands before and after handling all food, right? We want to keep all of these kitchen surfaces clean. And believe you me, I can start off with a clean kitchen surface, and by the time I get through with any jam or jelly, there's like stuff spread from here to there. And it's just good to ensure that you start off clean and then you can clean up afterwards. You're going to want to wash all your fruits and vegetables. This is again to make sure that you have the lowest amount possible of like all of these spores and microbes and bacteria that you're going to be putting into the jar, but also it gives you a chance to take a look at the fruits and vegetables because what you want is you don't want any spoilage. I can't make anything that's already bad better by preserving it. That's just not the way the world works. And that's okay. Because if you wash all your fruits and vegetables, you're handling them, you can see which ones maybe need to be put to the side and, given to the chickens or whatnot. You're going to avoid cross-contamination, especially when you're using cutting boards for meats, such as fruits and vegetables, and then using the same cutting board from preparing raw food for the cooked food. Again, you don't want something that is pretty clean to pick up something that is not so clean and then put it back into that because you just can't ensure how much of what has actually gone gotten into the other portion. You want to keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold. This is a good reminder, especially when we're coming around to the holiday season. A lot of people like to have things just out and about. And they're like, okay, well, it's time to put it up. And again, I can't stress this enough. Follow all instructions and recipes exactly. Do not alter. There are some things that you can alter, but you can't alter like the amounts and the proportions, right? You can alter like maybe from a jalapeno pepper to a bell pepper, but you have to have the same amount of proportions. So clean your jars and lids properly. You wipe the outside of the rim and the outside of the jar after filling it. And this can get pretty sticky, especially if you're making something with jelly. You are going to cook all of the foods thoroughly, especially if the recipe calls for it. In the recipe that I'm doing for tomorrow, it's the pepper jelly, and I've done this several times. I'm going to be cooking it, but by the time that I add the pectin, it says cook for 1 minute. And you better believe I am setting my timer, because if I cook it over that 1 minute, it turns from nice and really manageable to a stiff block pretty quickly, especially after processing. So you process all of those foods with the proper time based on the food size, the jar size, the pack style, and the type of canner. And then you adjust for the altitude if you need to have it. So again, this is why we put it up to that proper temperature, especially within our processing time, is because we don't want to have spoilage. We want to ensure that this is going to be safe. While opening the jar, try to smell for unnatural odors. Do not actually sniff the contents. Look for spurting liquid and mold, white, black, blue, green on food or underside of the lid. I will tell you about an incident that happened to me here recently. Let's see, it was back in September. I was judging for a county fair, and one of the things that I do is I look for the headspace. Like, did you follow the proper guidelines? Are you looking for headspace? So I took off the ring. As soon as I took off the ring, I was like, wow, that's kind of that's really pungent. The lid popped off and it started spurting the salsa out of the jar. And I was like, oh, that's not supposed to do that, because no, it is not supposed to do that. If you see that, you are going to do the same thing that I did. You're going to put it in a Walmart sack, you're going to take it out to the trash, and you're going to throw it away. That's what you're going to do. And then you're going to clean up any of that spoilage that has leaked out wherever it may be with basically bleach water. Ah, my old friend, botulism. So what exactly is botulism? So it's a life-threatening disease, and it's eaten from a potent neurotoxin produced during the growth of C. botulism bacteria, right? In the past, it was also linked primarily to home canned foods, right? But it's also linked to unrefrigerated homemade salsa, right? Baked potatoes sealed in aluminum foil, and it's in honey, primarily the cause of botulism in infants, and that's why they tell you not to give babies honey until after they're 1. And garlic and oil. So the bacteria produces spores, which produce the toxin, right? The spores are killed when heated long enough at a specific temperature. So you've got to get this up to 240 degrees at sea level. And this is only achievable in a pressure canner, okay? The foods must be properly prepared and processed at the correct time. And the canner must be accurately and operated correctly, and foods must be checked carefully when opening jars. So this is not the time to be creative with your recipes. This is why I say follow your recipe exactly. You're going to not add any extra fat or sugar. You're not going to have oversized pieces. You're not going to add thickeners. And you're going to avoid open kettle canning, which is inversion, oven canning, canning powders, whatever it may be. But you have to have a pressure canner, okay? This is my non-discrimination disclosure because we've reached the end of this. And these are all of my references. And then that is me. If you need to reach out to me, please don't hesitate. Shoot me an email and I will guide you in the best direction that I can. This is where I like to open it up to questions.
Yeah, great information, Stacey. I know we had someone drop in the chat, what brand or brands of jars would you suggest to use over others? I know you mentioned Ball earlier, but are there certain ones that are kind of best practices to use and maybe others to avoid, or what are your thoughts there?
Okay, so I'm not supposed to endorse any brands. I will say any major brands, like Ball or Kerr, are probably going to be better than because they have certain quality checks that maybe other processes don't have. And that's what I'm going to go with. Obviously, I can with a whole bunch of these, and I can definitely direct you towards those instead of those.
Great answer. And so I would say it seems like certainly with holidays, we might be actually receiving canned items as gifts or something along those lines. What can we do as people who might be receiving those, not necessarily the ones doing the canning, but receiving items from friends, family, with great intentions? What can we do to make sure that the items are safe and so on if we're not quite sure? We weren't there in the kitchen with them while it was being prepared.
Okay. I would probably ask them like, hey, this is thank you so much for the gift. Just run me through your process. Like, how did you make this a wonderful present for me? And be like, ask them a bunch of questions. If they don't offer up, like, hey, I made this. I used the Ball Blue Book. Please use this within 3 weeks or whatever. Make sure you store it in your refrigerator. I would ask them if they don't offer up the information. Um, Personally, that's what I would do.
Sounds good. Thank you. Someone did ask if you plan to share your pepper jelly recipe and also asking about the slides, if it's possible. If you send that to me, I would be happy to send that in the follow-up email to attendees, if that would be okay to share.
Of course. Yes, I will email the slides over to Lindsay and then Lindsay can email them out to you. I will say this much. Do I love this, and you can see all my tabs up here. This is actually the recipe that I'm using. It is from the 2023 Ball Blue Book. So, yeah.
Excellent. Fantastic. Anybody else with any questions? There's been some good ones come through.
So what I like to do, especially within my year, I like to have food preservation classes here at my office uh, throughout the year. In fact, tomorrow we'll be finishing up the very last of the series because I only run it for 6 months because that's only when a good majority of us are getting that produce. How do we safely prepare it and save it? So if anybody is interested in that, I can definitely email that list out to you just in case anybody is interested in coming to any of those food preservation classes. It'll start up in March. I'm pretty sure March.
Excellent. Yeah, if you have that, I'll be happy to share that in the follow-up
Okay.
email with attendees as well. You bet. Well, I'm not seeing anything else come through at the moment, but certainly, Stacy, you've shared your contact info. So if any of you all think of something later, please encourage you to reach out to this great resource, very knowledgeable, keeping us all healthy and safe with these great things. So thank you, Stacy, and everyone else for joining us today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody.